I'd like to introduce my friend, Dave Roberts. Mr. Roberts is the CEO and founder of SenseOps, but he's also a former OSIsoft employee where he was the VP of Business Development. So Dave, please welcome Dave to the stage.
Thanks, Enrique. Hi, everybody. So User Conference number 17 for me. I've been a customer, I've been an employee, and now I'm a partner, so I'm kind of going full circle with all this. So last year I started this company after leaving OSIsoft to focus on what people now call the edge, but I was looking at all this compute resource and connectivity and memory that is coming out into this world that is going to be directly connected to sensors and assets and gateways and systems, and started to think about how could we take advantage of all this distributed compute resource, but also how we can start to take advantage of distributed web technologies and how we deal with data acquisition, data management, and driving value for customers. So we started this company to focus on sort of how you solve depending on your perspective, the first 50 feet or the last 50 feet of connecting to these unconnected assets. One of the non-trivial jobs is to figure out on these legacy assets, okay, what is it? Does it have a control system? Does it have a PLC? But then what are the points of failure on that asset, or what are the critical pieces of data you need out of the process? And so we work with the customer to define off-the-shelf sensor package that enables them to get that data off of those legacy assets. And those sensor packages, there's literally tens of thousands of them in the market today, and there'll probably be 200,000 of them within the next year or two, right? They're just coming everywhere. We wired or wirelessly, depending on the use case, take that data and bring it into an off-the-shelf gateway grade product as an aggregation point for this data. Today, we see that aggregation happening at the gateway. Down the road, we think you might actually do some of this function directly on board the sensor itself as we start to see more connectivity and more memory and compute attached to the sensors. We are hardware agnostic, but we do operate in a native Linux world. So this world is Linux. Sorry, ex-Microsoft guy. So we purpose-built software to run in that Linux environment. We're not a hardware vendor. I don't want to be a hardware vendor. I want to pick hardware that is use case specific. If I'm going into a chemical plant, I might need a class 1 Div 2 chassis. If I'm doing something in a residential environment, a little plastic box with a power supply is probably adequate. The idea being is that we figure out the sensor and gateway deployment pattern that is appropriate for the use case. Our software runs in native Linux environment. We have an archive to store data from all this sensor environment, but also do the engineering conversion. As those pulses come out of those sensors, you need to turn that into a flow or a temperature or a value. And so we can do that pre-processing of the data and archive the data directly on the edge device. The edge device is also a web server. So now you can do visualization in the proximal network directly on the edge device itself. So that means that if you're driving in a truck out to a wind turbine, you can actually look at the data from that turbine without having to go back to the cloud and have that connectivity. You're inside the proximal network. We also think there's applications for this where privacy is a concern, where customers, owners of assets, or tenants are going to want to maintain that archive of their data inside their domain. They're not going to want to push all of their rich sensor data up to some cloud application. We can work with existing connectivity. So if we go into an environment where the customer has connectivity, great. We can work on managed networks. We can work on unmanaged networks. And now increasingly, we're starting to do work in the LTE, unlicensed, and LoRa spaces, and starting to think about what do these purpose-built machine-to-machine networks, private networks really imply when you start to move really high volumes of time series data. And of course, I have a 20-year relationship with OSIsoft and continue that relationship. We still view Pi as the tool to aggregate all of this data and provide you that fleet-wide analytic. But it also is the platform from which I can integrate up into other value added things like an SAP or an Esri or a SaaS or wherever I want to take that data. So a couple of examples real fast. What's really interesting about this one is this guy makes a milling machine and he tries to sell it for a $400,000 capital asset. His customers asked him if they could lease the machine. He said, sure, but that meant he took operating risk. If the machine did not operate, he didn't get paid his $20,000 a month. So he needed visibility on how the machine was running, traditional asset management data, but he also needed to understand how the operator was using it. Was he treating it like a rental car, or was he treating it like a cream puff, right? So how was that operator using the machine was very interesting data to him. Then he figured out that his customers, depending on what they put through the machine, got wildly different value out of the use of the machine. So he changed his model again to move to a material throughput ton per month model rather than a lease model. So it's kind of like Xerox going from selling you a copier to leasing you a copier to selling you copies. But it was a complete transformation of his business model from being a guy trying to sell a $400,000 chunk of steel to a guy selling throughput. And he had to completely transform his data plan to do that. This is another one that's really interesting to me personally. I'm a big fisherman, if anybody knows me. These guys have a $2 to $3 million asset, that boat, and that boat goes 1,000 miles offshore and has 25 lives on board. So you have to make darn sure that that machine is operating. It's just like your airline. It's just like Southwest Airlines. If it's not flying or if that boat isn't fishing, it's not making money. And so these guys were really interested in being able to do not only predictive analytics, but where it got interesting for us is they're 1,000 miles offshore. All they've got is a sat phone on this boat. How do you manage data in that scenario? If you tried to stream a whole bunch of sensor data in a typical IoT to cloud platform across a sat phone, it would break. So we had to think about in this scenario how we aggregate data and then how we transmit data on event so that we're moving important data up when we, stuff happens. So with that, I want to say thank you. We're over in the IoT zone by lunch, so important things, buy the food. So if you come by the food, come by and see us, and we're happy to give you a demo. Thank you.